you may remain seated for the moment. On the 7th of October 2023, a terrorist group called Hamas, which is prescribed in this country under the Terrorism Act 2000, carried out an attack on southern Israel. Many hundreds of people were killed and over 200 taken hostage. There was widespread media coverage of these events and of the armed response of the State of Israel against Hamas in the Gaza Strip, which also led to many, many deaths. Just a week later, shortly after 5 a.m. on the 15th of October, Ahmed Ali Alid armed himself with 2 knives from his kitchen and tried to kill Javid Nuri, a Muslim convert to Christianity, while shouting out in Arabic, "Allahu Akbar," Allah is the greatest. Then he went out into the street and murdered a complete stranger, Terence Carney, a 70-year-old Englishman taking an early morning walk. He was arrested shortly afterwards, still in possession of the blood-stained knife he had used to stab Mr. Carney, and with the blood of Mr. Nuri on his clothing. He thought he had killed both men, and he told the police he wanted to kill them because of the conflict in Gaza, and so that Palestine would be free from Zionists. He made references to historical links between Britain and Israel. He said he would have killed many more people if he had been able to, because so many innocents were being killed in Gaza. At the end of the police interview, he struggled with the 2 female interviewing officers and assaulted them. Ahmed Ali did not have the courage to admit his guilt in court. He tried to persuade the jury that when he stabbed Mr. Nuri and Mr. Carney, he hadn't intended to kill them or even cause them serious harm. He pretended that the admissions and explanations he gave to the police had been mistranslated by an interpreter, and the political and religious causes he had cited were not his actual motivation. The men and women on the jury saw through these lies. The evidence against him was overwhelming. He was convicted on the 25th of April 2024 after a 2-week trial. Sentence was adjourned so that the court had the fullest information and argument before proceeding. The only sentence a court can pass for murder is life imprisonment. The court must then determine whether to fix a minimum term, and if it does, what the minimum term will be, or by not fixing a minimum term, impose a whole life order, which would mean that the offender is likely never to be released. If fixing a minimum term, it must take into account such matters as the seriousness of the combination of the offence of murder and any offences associated with it. In this case, I must sentence for murder, attempted murder, and 2 offences of assaulting an emergency worker in the execution of her duty. Schedule 21 to the Sentencing Act 2020 is the relevant legislation from which the correct starting point for the minimum term of a life sentence for murder must be identified. The first issue is whether, as the prosecution assert, the seriousness of the murder alone or in combination with the attempted murder is exceptionally high, such that the starting point is a whole life order. It's argued on the defendant's behalf that the seriousness is not exceptionally high. Rather, it is either particularly high because the murder was aggravated by racial or religious hostility, or it is to be assessed on the basis that the murder was committed with a knife taken to the scene of the crime. A second issue is the submission on the defendant's behalf that there is mitigation to be found in a lack of significant premeditation, the absence of typical terrorist mindset evidence, his previous good character, and a mental condition that he had at the time. This has been diagnosed by a consultant psychiatrist as an adjustment disorder. The jury's verdicts do not provide the answers on these issues because they were not asked to determine the defendant's motives, which were not any part of the ingredients of the offences charged. Like a jury, a judge must apply the criminal burden and standard of proof when determining the basis upon which to pass sentence. Any doubt must be resolved in favour of the defendant. Having presided over the trial and read the psychiatric reports provided to the court after the convictions, I am sure of the following facts. Ahmed Ali Alid speaks Arabic and some English. He is 45 years old, having been born in Morocco in 1979. He gave evidence that he ran a business in Algeria before leaving that country in 2007. He has no history of mental illness. Late in 2020, he travelled by ferry from Holland to England. He had no lawful right to enter the country. He was not challenged by border force personnel, but at some stage afterwards he was arrested. He told the jury that he came to Britain to find work. However, after his arrest, he applied for asylum, claiming that he could not return to Algeria because criminals who falsely believed he had reported them to the police would harm him. He told a psychiatrist, Dr. Mark Turner, who interviewed him in December 2023 and again in March 2024 before the trial, that he came to Europe in search of a better life for himself. He tried to get work in several European countries without success, and before arriving in England, he had sought and failed to obtain asylum in Spain, France, Germany, and elsewhere. Police inquiries established that he had been detained in immigration detention in the Netherlands, on the Swiss-French border, and in Germany, where he had spent at least 3 periods of time. No decision was made on his claim by the Home Office until after he had been charged with these offences. His application for asylum was refused on the 3rd of November 2023. Meanwhile, in 2021, he was allocated a room in a house in Wharton Terrace, Hartlepool, where other asylum seekers were living. Ahmed Alid was devout, chaste, and teetotal. He prayed 5 times a day, ate only halal food, and took part in communal prayer in a mosque. He stayed in touch with his family by phone. A counter-terrorism command investigation has found no evidence in his social media, phone records, or elsewhere of any links to or communication with any extremist Islamist individuals or groups. On the 5th of August 2023, Javid Nuri, a 31-year-old man from Iran who had converted to Christianity, moved into the house. He spoke Farsi and was learning English. He and the defendant were not on good terms from the start. He remonstrated with the defendant for his lack of cleanliness, and this led to resentment on the defendant's part. Mr. Nuri upset the defendant by other behaviour, including using a shared fridge to store beer, which he considered disrespectful. Although they didn't speak the same language, Mr. Nuri realized that the defendant was extreme in his religion and considered him, Mr. Nuri, an apostate, one who has voluntarily denounced Islam. In some Muslim-majority countries, apostasy is a criminal offence, sometimes punishable with the death penalty. The defendant would curse both Mr. Nuri and another resident who he thought behaved in a way that was haram, forbidden in Islam, such as inviting a girlfriend into the house. He was heard saying that they were the devil, that Allah should damn them. Unlike the other residents, Mr. Nuri, a physically large, strong man, was not afraid to confront and argue with the defendant or make light about his fastidiousness with food and conduct. Another man, who sometimes stayed in the house as a guest, told the jury that the defendant thought of them as garbage. After Israel declared war against Hamas on the 8th of October and announced a siege of Gaza the next day, Mr. Nuri became concerned because he saw the defendant watching on his mobile phone what Mr. Nuri called footage of terrorist news. He was laughing and praising Allah when the footage showed that Hamas had killed children and women. Mr. Nuri noticed that the defendant would keep a knife out when he was in the kitchen, even if he wasn't using one. Mr. Nuri contacted friends at the local church, the charity Migration Help, and those responsible for managing the accommodation to tell them that he thought his life and those of the others in the house were in danger. His instincts were right. He was advised to go to the police, which he did. After that, the accommodation staff visited and spoke to the defendant, telling him that if he carried on behaving as he was, he would be asked to leave. They were satisfied that the defendant would heed their warning. When Mr. Nuri went back to the police by arrangement on the 13th of October, he was prepared to trust the defendant would change, and the police concluded it was a matter for those responsible for the house to manage. By this time, of course, the armed forces of Israel were carrying out military action in Gaza and warning people to evacuate. It is clear from thumbnail images found later on the defendant's phone that he had viewed distressing media output of the conflict. This was mainstream and YouTube footage. He had also heard that his mother was ill. The evening of the following day, 14th of October, Mr. Nuri noticed the defendant watching him when he returned to his room after a bath. At around midnight, the friend who sometimes stayed overnight and who understood some Arabic arrived at the house and heard the defendant shouting and swearing in the corridor about religion. He was saying, "These shameless, faithless people, I hope God puts them in hell, in the deepest part of hell." Several hours later, at around 5 a.m. on the 15th of October, Javed Nuri was asleep with the door to his room locked. The defendant went into the kitchen, took out 2 knives and broke into Mr. Nuri's bedroom. He attacked Mr. Nuri, stabbing him twice in the chest and shouting, "Allahu Akbar." Mr. Nuri woke up and fought him. One of the knives was broken in the attack and fell to the floor. When tested later, the blade bore DNA matching that of Mr. Nuri. It was dark and he was terrified, but he knew he had to resist and overpower the defendant, who then tried to stab him in the neck, catching his mouth. In the struggle, he managed to wound Mr. Nuri in the leg, causing him to collapse. The victim screamed to rouse the others in the house. He got hold of the defendant in a headlock and disarmed him of the knife he still had. In response, the defendant punched him in the head and tried to find the other knife, continually shouting, "Allahu Akbar." The struggle and the defendant's words were caught on the 999 call made from the house. Mr. Nuri managed to pass the knife he'd got hold of to one of the other men, who threw it away in the hallway before running upstairs to hide from the defendant until the police arrived. Despite feeling faint from loss of blood, which was significant, Javed Nuri held onto the defendant until he was able to maneuver him out of his room. Even then, Ahmed Alid picked up the knife that had been thrown away in the hall and tried to get back into Mr. Nuri's room. He prevented this by putting his weight against the door from the inside. And Javed Nuri sustained 2 wounds to his chest and wounds to his lip, thigh and calf, as well as cuts to his back, a finger and bruising to his head. I am sure that the defendant waited to assault him until he was asleep and vulnerable. Mercifully, the attempt to kill Javed Nuri was unsuccessful. When armed police eventually entered the house and found him, he had low blood pressure due to the severe blood loss, and his condition was potentially life-threatening, although the defendant had failed to strike any vital organs or cause internal bleeding. The life Mr. Nuri had started to build in this country was shattered by what happened. He has had to move to another part of England. He has lost proximity to his friends and community links. He has been left with psychological injury. He says, "All my thoughts of here being a safe country have gone. I would expect to be arrested and possibly executed for converting to Christianity in my home country. I did not expect to be attacked in my sleep here." Returning to the 15th of October, Mr. Terence Carney was a local man from Hartlepool, the port town in County Durham, who enjoyed walking in the peace of early mornings. He was someone of quiet habits, strongly connected to his wife and daughter, who miss him deeply. Their powerful impact statements remind the court that the defendant's random targeting of a lone man in the street has touched many lives and more than one generation. The sentence I pass, whatever it is incapable of undoing the harm the defendant has caused to that family. No period of incarceration would be equivalent to the life he has taken, and that's not the purpose of sentencing. Having been thwarted in his murderous attempt on Mr. Nuri, the defendant walked out of the house and down the road. He held the knife in his hand and was captured on CCTV footage holding it up in the air. As he walked along, he continued saying, "Allahu Akbar." After just a few minutes, he approached Mr. Carney, who saw him and crossed the road to avoid him. What happened is recorded on CCTV footage. The defendant went over to him, still holding the knife. He confronted Mr. Carney, who gestured that he didn't want to engage with him. Ahmed Alid then attacked that unarmed elderly man who was unable to defend himself. I am sure that the defendant gave a deliberately false account in evidence and to the psychiatrist about what happened between him and Mr. Carney. He said to the jury that he was walking along saying, "Free Palestine," and in response Mr. Carney made a pejorative and racist remark to him. He told the psychiatrist that upon hearing this, he felt as if Mr. Carney was responsible for Israel's actions in Gaza and reacted by stabbing him, but only in the leg, at which Mr. Carney fell to the ground and said, "Israel, Israel," at which the defendant left. I am sure from the CCTV footage and the medical evidence that as soon as Mr. Carney saw the knife and tried to get away, the defendant attacked him, stabbing him repeatedly in the body. The knife he used had a 20-centimetre blade. At one point during the assault, he dropped the knife, but picked it up again to continue stabbing his victim. And when the injured Mr. Carney fell, the defendant got himself into a position so that when he got up again, he could strike him again in the chest. Cries are heard on the footage, and it's likely that Mr. Carney was begging, "Please, please," which is what the defendant told the police in his interview. But he showed him no mercy. He left him lying on the road. Mr. Carney was treated by emergency services, but all efforts to save his life were futile, and he died on the roadside, close to where he had been left. He had sustained 6 stab wounds and a number of other injuries in the attack. He died of massive internal bleeding caused by 3 of the wounds, which had pierced his lung, his liver, and his heart. The defendant was arrested within 20 minutes of the attack with the knife in his waistband. He had injured his own hands with the knives he had wielded. At the police station, he made unsolicited comments in Arabic directly into an officer's body-worn camera, stating that he had acted for the people of Gaza and, inshallah, God willing, Gaza would return to being an Arab country. He was agitated and had to be told to sit down. Among prayers praising Allah and condemning those who do not believe or who stray from Allah, he said that had his hands not been injured, he would have continued what he called the Ghazwa, a battle or raid against non-Muslims. He said that Jews had divided the Arabs and the army of Muhammad would return to live in Al-Quds, which is Jerusalem. And at that time, non-believers would be humbled and have to pay tax to the Muslim rulers. He was seen by several medical professionals at the police station and assessed. The cuts he had caused to his hands were treated in hospital. He was fit to be detained and to be interviewed. In an interview the following day, in the presence of an independent solicitor and an interpreter, the defendant confessed to the attempted murder of Javid Nuri and the murder of Terence Carney. Initially, he believed he had succeeded in killing both men. He explained that the issue was the independence of Palestine. He had killed 2 adults in revenge for Israel killing innocent people and children by airstrikes, which demolished buildings and destroyed infrastructure. He repeatedly expressed the view that the dunya, this world or humanity in general, was rotten. He said that if he had had more weapons and a machine gun, he would have killed thousands. He described Mr. Carney as an innocent victim who was killed because Britain had created Israel, which he called the Zionist entity. He predicted that Britain was on the verge of a flood, unrest, and an explosion if Israel did not leave Gaza. He said that Britain would be a wreck. He claimed he was ready for his own shahada, martyrdom. There is no evidence that the defendant had or sought access to a firearm in the UK, although in his evidence he said he had known someone in Germany who did. During the interview, he became irritated with the interpreter. After it ended, he got up and blocked the door, preventing the officers from opening it. His solicitor was so concerned, he made an emergency call from inside the room. When the door was opened from the outside, the defendant lunged at one of the 2 female interviewing officers, and he refused to release her. The other officer tried to separate them. All 3 fell to the floor. The officers were shaken and one suffered modest injury. The defendant was also convicted of deliberately assaulting 2 emergency workers. He was charged on the 16th of October, and in response to the two main charges, he continued to reiterate his beliefs and the justification for his actions, namely, that the Zionists have killed lots of children and people, far more than those that he had killed, and that the Zionists must go because they are criminal and killing innocent people. He also repeated that the United Kingdom was fully accountable for what was happening in Palestine. The legal principles relevant to the exercise of judgment I must carry out are summarised in the judgment of the Lord Chief Justice in the Crown and Stewart and others in 2022. The key responsibility of the judge is to have full regard to the features of the case before her, so that the sentence truly reflects the seriousness of the particular offences. I'm grateful to counsel on both sides for the assistance that they have given me. No pre-sentence report was requested and none was necessary. I have regard to the terms of Schedule 21 and remind myself that reaching a conclusion in a case like this is not a matter of mathematical formula or mechanical application of a balance sheet of features pointing towards or away from a particular outcome. This was a murder, an attempted murder, carried out in revenge for the actions of Israel bombing in the Gaza Strip in response to a terrorist attack. It was also a reaction to the religious conflict with Javid Nuri. The defendant said in clear terms afterwards that his intention was to influence Britain's leaders and its people and thereby advance a religious and political cause, namely that of Islam and the independence of Palestine. The mention of British involvement in the creation of Israel refers back more than 100 years of history in a letter known as the Balfour Declaration, written to a leader of the British Jewish community in 1917. The then Foreign Secretary committed the British government to establishing a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. A period known as the British Mandate after World War I was full of conflict in the region. The conflict continued after the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948, and as we all know, it continues still. Schedule 21, paragraph 2 states that the appropriate starting point is a whole life order if the court considers that the seriousness of the offence or of the combination of the offence and another offence associated with it is exceptionally high, and the offender was over the age of 21 when the offence was committed. The schedule makes it clear that a murder done for the purpose of advancing a religious or political cause will normally be an offence of exceptionally high seriousness. It is on a par with the usual outcome when a police officer is murdered in the execution of his duty. This is because they are both examples of crimes whose magnitude go far beyond the murder of an individual. They are an attempt to undermine and destroy foundational components of an ordered democratic country where causes are promoted through lawful means, not violence. The violence itself was short-lived. Nonetheless, I've come to the firm conclusion, given the defendant's explanation of his motives in the police interview, a whole life order is the correct starting point. In common with the other starting points in Schedule 21, the starting point is not always the end point. The court must also weigh all relevant features, including aggravating and mitigating circumstances, and detailed consideration of these may result in a minimum term of any length or in the making of a whole life order, as paragraph 8 of Schedule 21 shows. The criteria in Section 69 of the Terrorism Act 2020 are met in this case, and the law is that I must treat that as an aggravating feature and say so, which I do. The defendant committed 2 acts of serious violence against people for the purpose of advancing a political or religious cause, and his attacks were designed to influence the government and intimidate the public through fear. There are other aggravating elements. That there was premeditation in this case is beyond doubt. Mr. Alid was threatening in his manner towards Mr. Nuri, in particular, in the days leading up to the 15th of October, and the fear he caused was such as to lead to a report to the police. The reason was that Mr. Nuri had decided to leave the Muslim religion. On the night itself, he deliberately armed himself with 2 knives, and the defendant waited until his victim was asleep and in a vulnerable state before breaking into his room. He took one of those knives out of the house for use as a weapon and used it to kill. Turning to mitigation advanced on the defendant's behalf, there are 5 factors which require consideration. It is submitted that I should conclude that there was an intention to cause really serious harm, the very thing the defendant denied at his trial, rather than an intention to kill. I reject that argument. Ahmed Ali Alid intended to kill both of his victims and succeeded in killing one. The psychiatric assessment of Mr. Alid was carried out prior to his trial and again on the day the trial began. There was no evidence of mental ill health relied on prior to the conviction. Subsequently, 2 reports have been served. Psychosis and any other serious mental illness have been excluded. The diagnosis is that of a recognised medical condition, a minor mental illness, called an adjustment disorder, which would have impacted on the defendant's judgment. Dr. Turner identifies the cause of this temporary condition as the combination of pressures under which the defendant found himself, from conflict in the house with Mr. Nuri, his own impecuniosity, his drawn-out wait for a decision on his asylum application and permission to work, worry about his mother's ill health, together with the acute emotional impact on his religious sensibility of the suffering caused to Muslims by the Hamas-Israel conflict. In my judgment, the adjustment disorder provides very limited mitigation. It explains to some degree his antagonism in the shared house, but it does not reduce his culpability for murder or attempted murder at all, because it is not sufficiently connected to such a serious level of violence. The defendant told the psychiatrist that his mental state settled down 10 days after his arrest, that he regretted what he had done and he felt very guilty. The expression of regret and guilt was not reflected in guilty pleas to any criminal offence, not even the assaults on the police officers. I've had the opportunity to observe Mr. Alid at length, particularly during his evidence. I've seen no sign of apology or remorse. This is a lack of mitigation and demonstrates that what he said to the psychiatrist was not born of genuine contrition. In my judgment, the only mitigation of any weight overall is in the lack of evidence of prior terrorist inclinations already identified. However, as I've noted, that does not equate to there being no evidence of premeditation or preparation. The defendant's antagonism towards Javed Nuri had been growing, and Mr. Nuri was frightened of him. The defendant has subsequently tried to minimise the religious element to his attacks, telling the psychiatrist that he did not say Allahu Akbar when stabbing Mr. Nuri. And although he had to admit to the jury that he had said this, he tried to minimise it by saying he was crying out to Allah because he thought Mr. Nuri was going to kill him. This is plainly a lie, and it indicates again that the defendant has no genuine remorse or pity towards his victims, as opposed to regret for the outcome and consequences. I take into account that Mr. Alid has no previous record of criminal convictions, although this is of lesser potency than in other circumstances, given the severity of these offences. Imposing a sentence under paragraph 2 is the last resort for cases of the utmost gravity, where the judge is satisfied that just punishment requires it. Each conviction which falls within the whole life order starting point must be considered on its own facts, and I've given this case thorough consideration. The murder of Terence Carney was an extremely serious offence. those who genuinely seek refuge in this country will embrace the values we hold dear. These values include respect for the dignity of each person as an individual, with freedom to choose their political opinion without intimidation, and whether to observe a particular faith without fear or oppression. These moral and ethical principles are based on the Judeo-Christian foundation of our social structures. Not all ideas are of equal quality or integrity, but religious and political freedom is something that generations have fought for. Given my findings of fact, the murder of Terence Carney and the attempted murder of Javid Nuri were intended to subvert those values and to lead our government to pursue a particular course concerning the situation in Palestine by force and fear rather than through democratic means. This means those offences were of extreme gravity, even within the context of murder. Inevitably, given his age today, the appropriate term, if a finite term is set, will be of such a length as to lead the defendant spending most of the rest of his life in custody. Having considered all these matters, especially the outcome of the Counter-Terrorism Command's investigation into the defendant's prior mindset, and bearing in mind the power I have to impose a suitably severe minimum term, I am not persuaded that this is one of the rare and exceptional cases in which the element of just punishment and retribution can only be satisfied by the imposition of a whole life order on count 2, murder. Accordingly, I reach a provisional minimum term above that in paragraph 3 of Schedule 19 because this was a terrorist offence. It's also necessary to allow for a proportionate increase to take account of the attempted murder. Applying the Sentencing Council's attempted murder guideline, the offence in count 1, it is agreed, is one of category 2A seriousness, as Mr. Nuri received life-threatening injuries, although due to the work of the emergency services, without long-term physical consequences. This is a Schedule 19 offence. The starting point is 30 years imprisonment within a range of 25 to 35 years. The aggravating and mitigating features have already been discussed. I agree with the prosecution that Mr. Alid is a dangerous offender, and in all the circumstances, the conviction on attempted murder requires the imposition of imprisonment for life under Section 285 of the Sentencing Act 2020. The notional determinate sentence that would have been imposed on that count had the court not come to that conclusion is one of 30 years imprisonment. The sentence on count 1 must be a concurrent term of life imprisonment with a minimum term of 20 years minus the period spent on remand since his arrest, which is 213 days. This means the minimum term for that life sentence, if it was the only offence I had to sentence for, would be 19 years and 52 days. It should be understood by everyone that because of the sentence for murder, this period, which I have to state by law, does not actually affect the overall period to be served. Accordingly, I bear in mind both the concurrent term on count 1 and the terrorism aggravation in fixing a final just and proportionate term to be served for murder. In all the circumstances, before making the adjustment to allow for the period already served on remand, the minimum term on count 2 for murder is 45 years. Stand up, Ahmed Ali Alid. On the 15th of October last year, you attacked and murdered Terence Carney in a terrorist act. You intended it as revenge for the actions of a foreign country, Israel, and to intimidate and influence the British government in its international relations. You hoped to frighten the people of Britain and to undermine the freedoms they enjoy. When you attempted to kill Javid Nuri, it was also intended to punish him for converting to Christianity, because that is not permitted by your Muslim faith, which brands him an apostate. For each of these offences, you are sentenced to life imprisonment. For attempted murder, the minimum term is 19 years, 52 days. This will be served concurrent to the sentence for murder. The minimum term for murder, of which you must serve every day, is 44 years and 52 days. After that time has passed, the parole board will be able to decide whether you can be released. It is possible that you will not be released even then. Given the sentences I've passed, there will be no separate penalty for the 2 charges of assaulting an emergency worker in the execution of her duty. Finally, I impose the statutory surcharge in the appropriate amount. Please take him down.
Well, that is Justice Cheema-Grubb there, handing down sentence to Islamic extremist Ahmed Ali, who on the 15th of October murdered Terence Carney, a 70-year-old. He also attempted to murder his flatmate Javed Nuri, as well as assaulting an emergency worker. That sentencing being handed down from Teesside Crown Court there, where the sentenced to life for murder, the most serious of those charges there, for which he receives a minimum term of 44 years. The judge, Justice Cheema-Grubb, said despite his expression of regret to his psychologist, the judge herself found no sign of apology or remorse, and that the crimes were of the utmost gravity. We can bring in our correspondent, Sky's Shingi Marariki, who has been following this sentencing from Teesside Crown Court. Shingi, afternoon to you. I was just describing particularly brutal murder and attempted murder, as well as an assault on an emergency worker there. Bring us up to speed, give us a little bit more background.
So for those offences you just listed out, Ahmed Ali has been sentenced to a minimum term of 44 years. And in that sentencing, Justice Cheema-Grubb there talking about adding terror offences to this as factors that worsen the crime. The 45-year-old asylum seeker from Morocco attacked his housemate, first of all, in that incident in October last year. His housemate was an Iranian asylum seeker called Javed Nuri. He set out with 2 kitchen knives, stabbing him in the chest, shouting, "Allahu Akbar, God is the greatest." During that assault, there was a struggle that ensued. A knife ended up in the corridor, and Javed Nuri managed to fend off the attacker. At that point, the attacker tried to get back into the room. The police were called, and we've heard a 999 call, which is frankly disturbing and very distressing. You could hear the shouts of Allahu Akbar. You could also hear the screaming taking place. At that point, he walked into the corridor, and then he took one of the knives that had come loose in the struggle and walked out onto the street. He walked onto the street in Hartlepool looking for someone. He eventually found Terence Carney, a 70-year-old man who was going out on a daily walk, which he did as usual, and he stabbed him 6 times. One of those blows was a fatal wound, puncturing his heart. Several other organs were injured in that attack as well. He died on the roadside, the police discovering him when they went to the scene of the original attack. And then what ensued after he was arrested close to the scene was an 87-minute police interview in which he talked about his justification for this crime, and he talked about his motives being linked to issues in the Middle East and being linked to Palestine. In his interview, he said the whole issue was the independence of Palestine, and to have 2 dead victims, because at this point he thought he had killed 2 people, was better than more. He added that Israel had killed a lot of children, so he killed 2 old people. He then admitted that Mr. Carney was a poor and innocent man who had committed no faults, but was killed because Britain had created Israel and should make it leave. All of that reflected in the sentencing remarks. He also told officers he would have killed more people. In fact, if he had a machine gun, he says that he would have killed thousands. He concluded that police interview saying that he wanted to achieve martyrdom. Then he attacked 2 female police officers, meaning a panic button then had to be called. And this is the kind of sentencing which has reflected on wider issues, including issues of counter-terror policing. And we've spoken to the head of counter-terror policing Northeast, who had this to say about Ahmed Ali Alid.
Alid carried out horrendous violent attacks on the streets of Hartlepool, and the sentence today reflects that. I think it's absolutely right that this was categorised as a terrorist offence. his comments that he made upon arrest and when he was being booked into custody clearly led us to believe that it's probably an act of terrorism. So working alongside Cleveland Police, we put counter-terrorism policing officers into that investigation to understand exactly what had gone on there. It was quite apparent from the narrative from Ali that his motivation was fueled by what he'd seen online in Gaza, and that he was exacting revenge on whoever he could on the streets of Hartlepool for what was happening.
A very good afternoon if you're just joining us here on Sky News. It is just after 12 o'clock. We're beginning this hour with some breaking news. An Islamic extremist who murdered a pensioner in Hartlepool has been given a sentence of life in prison with a minimum of 44 years. Just some background. 45-year-old asylum seeker Ahmed Ali Alid, he claimed to be from Morocco, would have killed more people if he had not been cornered by armed police while seeking out more victims. That is according to police. Let's go back to Teesside Crown Court. Sky's Shingi Marariki joins us there now. He's very likely to spend the rest of his life in prison, Shingi. And as I was just reading out there in the introduction, had he not have been stopped by emergency services, he would likely have killed more people in Hartlepool.
That's right. Ahmed Ali said if he had a machine gun, then he would have killed thousands. And during his sentencing, he showed very little remorse. At points, he was yawning and he started talking and had to be told to stop talking by police officers as he sat in the dock. And we also heard a bit about the impact that this has had on the victims. First of all, Javed Nuri, the fellow asylum seeker who he attacked on the basis that he had converted to Christianity. And Javed Nuri said that even though his physical wounds have healed, his mental wounds are still with him and will be with him for a very, very long time. He said in his victim impact statement, "Since this has happened, I feel I am dead. I believe it's God's will I didn't die. Perhaps someone else would not survive." He then said, I do not have a normal life. I do not trust anyone or anything, and I fear being attacked again. He went on to say, "My feelings of this being a safe country have gone. I'd have expected to be arrested and persecuted for converting to Christianity in my own country. I don't feel safe here anymore." And he says he has started to feel depressed and that anxiety and fear has started to fill his life. We also heard from Terence Carney's widow, Patricia, talking about how her life has been a struggle since. And she also said that if it wasn't for her age, she doesn't know how she would be able to go on living with this pain. She said, to put into words the feeling of losing the love of my life, Terence, who I refer to as Tess, is almost impossible. Each day goes by and I try to be brave, but inside I'm numb. I miss doing things with him. This has changed my life forever. She says, I don't feel I can be happy anymore. And at points, she felt like she could not go on much longer. She said that her day-to-day life has been difficult, from going into towns to Morrison's, to where near the scene of where he was stabbed, to spending time with her children and grandchildren. All of those people also affected. So that's the wide-ranging impact of these crimes, for which Alid Ahmed has been sentenced to 44 years at minimum in prison. And he will, I think, expect to spend the rest of his life in prison for those crimes.
All right, for now, Shingi, thank you. Just to take our viewers through the moment that the judge, Justice Cheema-Grubb, delivered that sentence at Teesside Crown Court.
On the 15th of October last year, you attacked and murdered Terence Carney in a terrorist act. You intended it as revenge for the actions of a foreign country, Israel, and to intimidate and influence the British government in its international relations. You hoped to frighten the people of Britain and to undermine the freedoms they enjoy. When you attempted to kill Javed Nuri, it was also intended to punish him for converting to Christianity, because that is not permitted by your Muslim faith, which brands him an apostate. For each of these offences, you are sentenced to life imprisonment. For attempted murder, the minimum term is 19 years, 52 days. This will be served concurrent to the sentence for murder. The minimum term for murder, of which you must serve every day, is 44 years and 52 days. After that time has passed, the parole board will be able to decide whether you can be released. It is possible that you will not be released even then. Given the sentences I've passed, there will be no separate penalty for the 2 charges of assaulting an emergency worker in the execution of her duty. Finally, I impose the statutory surcharge in the appropriate amount. Please take him down.
Well, that was the moment of the sentencing there in Teesside Crown Court. Let's go back to our correspondent, Shingi Marariki, who was following proceedings there. Shingi, we were talking about how he intended to kill more people. Emergency services praised for their response. Just talk us through the moment of his arrest.
Well, he was arrested nearby the scene after he had attacked Terence Carney, and at that point police took him in, and what was revealing and reflected on in those remarks by Justice Cheema-Grubb was his political and religious motivations, which he spoke about at length in a police interview. In that 87-minute interview, he talked about doing it for Palestine. He said the whole issue was the independence of Palestine. And he then went on to say that even though he knew Mr. Carney, a 70-year-old man, was a poor and innocent man who had committed no faults, he was killed because Britain had created, in his words, Israel and should make it leave. At the end of the interview, he then said he wanted to achieve martyrdom. And at that point, he attacked 2 police officers. The panic button then had to be pressed, which is a reminder of just how dangerous he was seen as, and something that was reflected on in sentencing. In fact, he had attacked 2 members of the police force, was something that was touched on in those sentencing remarks. And just to go further, that's something, the wider impact of what he had done was felt by the families of his victims. Talking in a victim impact statement read out on her behalf, we heard from Patricia, his wife, who said that she had no words and she was struggling to go on with her daily life. Seeing her grandchildren and doing day-to-day tasks had become a bit of a struggle. She used to say that she used to go into Morrison's in town. It was close to where he was attacked, and so she can no longer bring herself to going there. She talked about the impact on their grandchildren and children as well. And we know that Ahmed Ali Alid has been sentenced to at least 44 years in prison. Those political motivations, those religious motivations, also taken into account. This is seen as a terror offence, as well as that murder and attempted murder and those attacks on police officers.